To talk about the latest from South Korea, we have in Boston, Yoon Suk-yeol, who is the Associate Professor of Political Science with Baruch College of the City University of New York. And also we are joined in Beijing by Yang Xiyu, who is a Senior Research Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Professor Kang, tell me more about your takeaway from the inauguration ceremony and the speech given by the new president.
And in his inaugural speech, he highlighted the significance of freedom and liberty. And he seems to have in mind, President Yoon seems to have in mind liberal democracy or free market economy as a fundamental principle for the development of South Korea and its foreign relations with other countries. But as we know well, normative claim or emphasis on freedom, it does not necessarily guarantee that we can make it happen. So we'll see what will happen, but it's a very important turning point in Korean political history.
Professor Yang, many are watching the inauguration ceremony of the South Korean president, not only about the country, how is it likely to go in the future, but also what its role in the region. For example, the DPRK nuclear issue. Tell me more about your thoughts.
Both inside the situation of the Korean Peninsula and outside of the peninsula has been changed fundamentally in terms of the inter-Korean relationship. Now, the inter-Korean relationship has down to a very low level, even at a brink of crisis. After a very warm exchanges between the two, and outside of the Korean Peninsula, not only U.S.-DPRK relation get more complicated in deterioration, but also the multilateral dynamics surrounding the peninsula also got more complicated. Given the background, the new policies from Seoul has to be new, different from all of the predecessors one.
Audacious plan, quote unquote, that was the word used in the speech given by President Yoon in his approach about the DPRK nuclear issue. Now, Professor Kang, tell me more about your thoughts on this phrase.
President Yoon's this audacious plan reminds us the Lee Myung-bak government, policy in dealing with North Korea. Basically, denuclearization, complete denuclearization by North Korea first. And then if that's the case, huge economic reward about the denuclearization. So this sequence of dealing with North Korean nuclear issue is basically North Korea needs to somewhat unconditional surrender first. And then if that's the case, South Korea and other allied forces will reward North Korea. So the key issue is that how North Korea will take this kind of approach. But as we know, North Korea has launched already 15 times a missile test, and then we know that North Korea is preparing for new nuclear tests in the near future. We know that North Korea signaled quite clearly that it's going to build up its nuclear capability and its other strategic military capabilities. So audacious plans should include dialogue and diplomacy, not just denuclearization first and then economic reward. I think that kind of approach would not be accepted by North Korea.
Talking about geopolitical changes in the region, Professor Yang, one of the things is where South Korea stands. Of course, the new president, President Yoon, used the phrase human rights to be the center of their principles for the country. However, what is that going to be translated into when it comes to how to deal with other countries, the neighbors, is up to interpretation. Tell me more about your thoughts on this.
This is new elements in South Korea's foreign policy compared with all of his predecessors, simply because he very clearly and definitely put sensitive items of human rights in high profile into the foreign policy. That means both towards the north and towards the related countries, including China. In fact, the items of human rights has been quite controversial, which can either be a tool to intervene the other sovereign countries' internal affairs, or can be a shared goals, jointly made joint efforts for the benefits of the human being. And so at this moment, it's unclear what kind of approach the new president of South Korea will be conducted. If he follow the Western countries' style to make the human rights item as political tools, policy tools to intervene the other countries' internal affairs, I think that will make a big trouble. However, if they make he make these items as a shared great goals, make a joint efforts with the related country, including China, for the human being, then it will be a positive momentum for bilateral and multilateral relations in this region.
The principles are always the principles, and yet how they will be translated into actions. And what does it mean when chemistry begins to be important among countries? That is the key, Professor Kang.
Right. So I would say that, when certain countries talk about human rights issue, in most cases, a kind of diplomatic rhetoric that they are not quite serious in terms of engagement or dialogue and talk. In reality, each society has a different cultural and political history and context. So it's always quite fuzzy, how to define human rights in reality. In most cases, it's a kind of, it can be used as an excuse, not engaging in with North Korea or maintaining some more, confrontational, foreign policy in dealing with North Korea and other, major issues in Northeast Asia.
We noticed that Professor Yang, on the geopolitical side, South Korea and the United States jointly have recently military exercises right before the inauguration ceremony of the new president. Of course, there is a lot of discussions about so-called competition between China and the United States, if not rivalry. And therefore, South Korea is trying to, I'm sure, finding its right place. How is China looking and observing from afar on this process that South Korea will, under the new president, is likely to search for?
It's a very good question. For China, we, frankly speaking, we don't pay too much attention to the upcoming and the ongoing joint military drills between the two allied states, U.S. and South Korea. We only have the concerns about the drill lies in the possible escalation of tensions on the peninsula, because such aggressive and strong drills will logically and certainly lead to the reactions for the other side, the northern part. When the North Korea make a reaction, then logically lead to the reaction from the south. Then we will see a sad story of cycle of escalation triggered by the two sides. That is the situation we hate to see. Regarding for China, although we don't pay attention to the drills, but we do pay special attention to the trend of U.S. ROK military alliance development. You have pointed out the strategic competition between China and the U.S. is getting more and more severe. And meanwhile, U.S. has putting more and more pressures on ROK government. We are going to continue to put pressures on the new government to take a side between China and the U.S. In my observation, the past administration led by Moon smartly and carefully avoid to take sides between the two big potatoes. Now we will closely watching what the new administration in Seoul will take.
Yeah, Professor Kang.
It's a so-called strategic ambiguity that was South Korea's diplomatic stance in the past during the Moon administration. And then on the current newly elected president administration, Mr. Yoon's administration, probably they are thinking about strategic so-called certainty, strategic certainty. So strategic certainty means that strengthening alliance relations with the United States and then strengthening bilateral relations with Japan as well. So in the end, from a medium and longer term perspective, strengthening US, ROK, and Japan, including military relationship as well, trilateral military alliance. And probably that seems to be a United States longer term, medium and longer term military strategies in dealing with China and Northeast Asia in general. We know that the United States already launched a so-called AUKUS, trilateral alliance relationship. And there's a report that the United States invited Japan to join this AUKUS alliance. But as we know, this trilateral relationship between United States and Japan and South Korea, especially Japan and South Korea relationship has been blocked and has been stalled and serious problem because of historical issues. So depending on the domestic political situation, for instance, how South Korean people think about strengthening bilateral relationship with Japan and then becoming a part of trilateral military alliance, would be quite critical in terms of determining the future of this US, ROK, and Japan relationship.
We noticed at the inauguration ceremony that President Yoon and the First Lady from South Korea has been specifically paying their respect to the previous presidents, particularly President Park, who certainly had a few turbulent years in and outside the prison. Now, what does that say about the South Korean politics and also about the role that some of the predecessors of the current President Yoon might play in providing advice, suggestions, and reference to the current president? Professor Kang.
Yeah, tough question. I would say that, the public poll in regard to the supporting public poll of the President Yoon is supporting rate, is below 50%, historically lowest, supporting rate after the democratic transition since the late 1980s. So he's basically very unpopular. And then South Korean politics have been, highly polarized. So the conservative group of, support base and then progressive. And then President Moon was representing a progressive, camp. And then President Yoon, the current newly established administration, is basically representing the interest of a conservative group. And then as you pointed out, President Park, although she was impeached, she is still very politically symbolic figure representing the conservative group of people. So probably newly elected President Yoon, he wanted to appeal to the supporting base of President Park and integrating the conservative group of people in South Korean politics. And then there's a local election scheduled in June 1st. So from his short-term political perspective, integrating his supporting background is very, very important. And in the Korean National Assembly, the opposition party right now, progressive group, is absolute majority in the National Assembly. So without consolidating his own supporting base, it's really difficult to execute his all those political, economic, and social, and even including foreign policy agendas. Yeah. So that'll be the case.
Now,
Mhm.
how is China looking at the overall picture and a close partner like South Korea in the neighborhood now?
Well, I think that China now has a very high expectation for the further development of the relationship between China and South Korea. Therefore, the China-South strategy sent the highest level of the representative to South Korea for the ceremony. If you look at the record, all the arrangements were represented by a person at a state councilor level. Now, at the vice presidential level, Vice President Wang Qishan, it is very unique. The unique arrangement caused by two reasons. One reason is this year is just a very historical point of 30th anniversary of the bilateral relation normalization between the two countries. So we need to have a great ceremony for the bilateral. And the second reason is more important. Say both South Korea and China now respectively entered a new stage of national development. And unfortunately and fortunately, the separate new stage of development will produce more contradictions, differences, but meanwhile will sparkling more opportunities. At this very critical point and the crossroad, both sides should make a greater efforts, joint efforts to strengthen rather than damage the bilateral relation.
Well, that certainly is an aspiration, hopefully, for both sides. Thank you so much, Professor Yang in Beijing and Professor Kang in Boston joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.